in Prescribing and Avoiding Remedies, How Industrial Associations Advanced Futures Out of the Brazilian Recession, 2014-2016, I argue that two of the main industrial associations, so organized business interests in Brazil, try to steer the political or the economic policies in Brazil and advance specific futures out of the crisis. The main contribution the article is aiming at is to establish a dialogue with the existing literature, mostly sociological and anthropological literature on future making, or the social construction of futures. And the main contribution to that literature is to recognize the role of definitions of the current situation and past experiences to the making of futures. This is the first contribution. The second contribution is to offer a much needed processual framework to understand how futures are actually made by organized interests. And the second contribution is exactly this processual framework, which comprises basically in the paper three elements: the frames actors advance, the publics they constitute, so the concerned audiences which they want to address with these frames, and what I call artifacts of persuasion. So devices, takeaway objects, graphs, numbers, tables, they mobilize to persuade people, to persuade exactly the public they constituted in the first place. As I said before, the article established a critical dialogue with the recent literature on futures. And just to cite three of the main names here, I mean, I'm talking mostly about Jens Becker's, Miyazaki's, and also Apadurai's contributions to that literature. They have discussed it extensively, the imagined and fictional nature of futures. Futures are always uncertain. We don't need, we don't have any instruments to actually calculate the future, but we might even use some models to do so, some forecasting models or prediction models, but they are wrapped up in narratives. That's what they have said. Especially due to the uncertainty that involves futures, they have also recognized that there is a contention or a controversy involved in future making, which is named by Jens Becker as a politics of expectations. In this article, I'm arguing that the future matters, of course, and is uncertain, of course, but in critical situations, in situations of crisis, to advance futures, actors discuss what is going on in the present. So there is a different sort of politics going on, not a politics of expectations, but a politics of signification of the current situation. The past also matters a lot, past experiences, and that's another contribution I'm bringing here. It's very relevant to know the past experience of nations and of political economies to understand how they define the current situation and how they advance futures. It also matters because the article discusses how organized business interests steer economic policies. So it has especially in context of crisis. So it has an empirical interest too. It's basically basically analyzing how this was done in Brazil in this specific crisis, but it could provide some hints, and I hope so at least, to understand how organized business interests deal with critical situations, how they mobilize past experiences, and try to frame the current situation to advance reforms. The work points out to the, as I said, the importance of the definitions of the present situation, but also past experiences. And I think that the first future direction of research would be, of course, to understand the role of different historical trajectories into how organized business interests produce futures, or how any actor engages in this politics of signification. Of course, I mean, countries have different trajectories, and due to this historical contingencies, the actual experience and meaning of crises are quite diverse too. So in countries that are that have faced many economic crises in the past decades, so Brazil or Argentina or some countries in Southeast Asia, Turkey, countries that, or even Russia, it could be interesting to see how actors mobilize this past of crisis differently and invoke this past differently. Of course, it would be very interesting to see the processual framework advanced in the paper applied to different crises and different contexts. And especially to see the role of these three elements: the frames, the public, and the artifacts of persuasion. I think that the latter element is also needs some further research. I compare two very different industrial associations in Brazil that mobilized very different artifacts of persuasion, but these are not the only artifacts of persuasion that one can imagine. So it could be interesting to see which materials, devices, elements could be mobilized to persuade the public. I basically dealt with tables, numbers, representations of the national economy, and takeaway objects, very playful takeaway objects. But of course, one can imagine that there are many other artifacts of persuasion that operate differently, and it'll be interesting to know more about this.